Hello there, I'm Tom, and you're listening to the first full-length episode of the Heavily Biased Top 10. This is the Championship Week primer and rankings reaction, where we will cover the games that will be played as conference championships this weekend and discuss some of the impacts of those games on the college football playoff. Starting off with games that are unlikely to change the nature of the college football playoff, we have Conference USA, where Western Kentucky will take on Jacksonville State. The CUSA Championship is an extra home game for the top team in the regular season, which means Jacksonville State Gamecocks will host the Hilltoppers of Western Kentucky in a field swap rematch from the game played last week at Western Kentucky. A win would be the first for Jacksonville State in CUSA, or the third CUSA title for Western Kentucky. The American Athletic Conference features Tulane at number 24 Army. At several points this season, it looked like an AAC team might figure a way into the playoff field, possibly at the expense of a spot for the Big 12. An upset win from Memphis, a 10-2 team who I called as a team to watch in the preseason, over Tulane, removed the last prospect of any AAC team making the playoffs. In an interesting twist of scheduling, Army plays both this week and next week, as they keep the traditional spot of the Army-Navy game on the schedule. The loss to Memphis broke a string of otherwise very dominant competition by the Green Wave, who may prove a difficult challenge for Army. This will be the third appearance for Tulane, who are seeking back-to-back AAC championships, and the first appearance for Army. The Mid-American Conference will play Saturday morning, with defending champion Miami of Ohio seeking to defend its title against Ohio, who are looking to break through for their first. This is the second meeting between these two, with the previous matchup won by Miami 30-20. On Saturday night, Marshall at Louisiana. The Sun Belt Championship sees its most frequent participant, the 10-2 Raging Cajuns, take on the conference champion newcomer, 9-3 Marshall Thundering Herd. There are no playoff implications for this game, yet it lands at a time spot where it overlaps both the Big Ten and the ACC championships. Next up, the games with title spots on the line. Number 20, UNLV at number 10, Boise State. The Mountain West Championship returns to the blue turf of Boise, where we have UNLV looking for their first conference title against four-time Mountain West champion Boise State. A Boise State win would secure them a first-round bye, but UNLV is in a position that would merit a playoff berth at the Broncos' expense if they pull off this upset. These two met at the end of October, with Boise rallying late to hand UNLV their second and final loss of the regular season. A UNLV win could allow the Big 12 to sneak back into the number 3 or 4 line depending on the outcome of the ACC championship on Saturday. In the early window Saturday, number 16 Iowa State takes on number 15 Arizona State. The Big 12 championship is for the lone spot that the conference will occupy in the playoff. Winners of 5 straight, Arizona State has risen from unranked in the opening CFP poll and 0 votes in the Week 10 polls to find themselves just 1 game away from the playoff field. Iowa State dropped 2 straight after a 7-0 start, but have clawed back to face a de facto playoff game for the 4th week in a row. This conference title would be a first for either school, though this is Iowa State's second appearance. The standalone game of the afternoon features number 5 Georgia versus number 2 Texas. The SEC Championship, the one that started it all in college football's top division, holds a standalone time spot, and this edition features Georgia against conference newcomer Texas. This game is for a bye in the college football playoff, and either the first or second overall seed depending on the outcome of the Big Ten title game. Georgia returns to this game for a 12th time, seeking their 5th title and hoping to pin a second loss on the Longhorns team that they defeated earlier this season. One thing of note in this game, a win by Texas will be the first SEC champion that is not Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, LSU, or Auburn since 1976 when Kentucky earned a share of the title. The last outright champion of the SEC that wasn't one of those 6, that would be Ole Miss in 1963. I've got 2 televisions set up for my night game. One will focus on number 3 Penn State versus number 1 Oregon in the Big Ten Championship. This also features 2 teams that are locked into playoff spots, playing for seeding. Oregon, a newcomer from the largely dissolved Pac-12, is the only undefeated team left standing, and would hold the number 1 overall seed with a win. Penn State could also push as high as the number 1 line with a win, depending on the outcome of the SEC title game. This would be a first win for Oregon in the Big Ten, or the second for Penn State in the title game era. The other game of interest in the evening features number 17 Clemson versus number 8 SMU. The game all eyes would be on towards the end of the day is the ACC matchup. Why? Isn't the Big Ten a bigger game? Of course it is, unless you're talking about the reach of the playoff implications. Coming off their second loss to an SEC team, Clemson backs into this game due to a Syracuse upset of Miami. SMU, who is a newcomer to the conference from the American Athletic Conference, is the only team to run the table in the ACC. Clemson is the most frequent participant and a champion of the ACC title game with 8 wins in 9 attempts. Moving on to our rankings reaction. There are no surprises in the top 4. The Live 8s that I published during Rivalry Week wound up mirroring the coaches' poll. In the coming weeks, the written version of the 2024 Heavily Biased Top 10 will be compiled to a Google Drive that I will link to the show notes. For now, I am going to use a portion of the written version of last week's episode to go over some of the rankings, reactions, and positions that can change in the playoff field. Starting off with number 1, Oregon. Oregon is the number 1 overall seed with a win, the number 5 overall seed with a loss, although I don't think that they will be ranked by the committee lower than 3rd. Remember, it is the conference champions that get byes. Number 2, Texas, will be on the number 2 seed with a win, or the number 1 seed with a win and an Oregon loss. I project that a loss by Texas would put them on the number 6 line. Number 3, Penn State, is the number 2 seed with a win, or a number 1 seed with a win and a Georgia win. Currently, I have Penn State projected at a 5 seed with a loss. Number 4, Notre Dame. Notre Dame, without playing in a conference championship, can be no higher than 5th. While this is their ceiling, I also project them no lower than number 7. Currently, I have Notre Dame sitting on the number 6 line. Number 5, Georgia, would be on the number 2 line with a win and either the 6 or the 7 line with a loss. Number 6, Ohio State, I have projected as the 8 seed. Number 7, Tennessee, I have projected as the 9 seed. This is also the first game that I see as a deadlock for round 1. These two coaching staffs should go ahead and start preparing for the matchup. Number 8, SMU. Here's where things start to get interesting. Initially, I felt like SMU was safely in the playoffs, barring a disaster of an ACC championship game. This is the highest-ranked team, not from the Big Ten or the SEC, so they're the number 3 with a win. However, should they lose to Clemson, the playoff committee has an interesting question on their table. How far do you move a team based on their extra data point? Their number 8 rank is behind 3 teams who will not be playing on Saturday and yet are 100% secure in their playoff spots. As a conference champion, I project them as the number 3 seed and a first-round bye. However, with a loss, that future comes into question, as they could be moved behind Alabama and find themselves outside of the playoff field. Number 9, Indiana. This is a team that I believe is locked in as the number 10 seed. Number 10, Boise State. Boise State is on the 3 line with a win and an SMU loss, or the number 4 line with a win. Boise State is projected eliminated from the playoffs with a loss. Number 11, Alabama. Alabama will sit idle and await the result of the ACC championship. An SMU win absolutely locks them on the 11 line, while a Clemson win might eliminate the 4th SEC team from contention. To close out this episode, we're going to shoot from the hip a little bit and discuss why we pick Alabama in the number 11 line ahead of Miami, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. When looking at these 4, I've run numbers several times and have also referred to the committee rankings and criteria. One thing that is consistent throughout the criteria is the importance of games on the field. So, the last few weeks when we have seen Ole Miss, Alabama, and South Carolina together, we have seen them always ordered in a particular way. That way has been Alabama on top, Ole Miss second, and South Carolina third. This clearly places an emphasis on the head-to-head matchups between Alabama and South Carolina and Ole Miss and South Carolina. 2 games that South Carolina lost. When we look at overall schedule, the schedules of South Carolina and Alabama are quite similar. Ole Miss is probably a little bit behind. One thing of note, when we look at Alabama's schedule and compare it to basically anybody else, Alabama is miles ahead. And it's a way that you can't really see until you crunch some of the numbers. With the season complete, we have every bit of data that we are going to get from all of the teams that have played in games that do not include their conference championships. That means that with the rare exception, everybody, when you look at their schedule, have 144 games to choose from. Miami, taken as a whole, played competition that was 74-70, meaning that the average Miami opponent is 6-6. They are 0-1 against current top 25 competition, where Alabama sits at 3-1 against the same field. There's a stark difference there. Alabama's competition on the season is a staggering 92-52. Yeah, in 144 games, Alabama's competition is 40 games above 500. Nobody else in that pairing, nobody else in that quad came anywhere close. Does Alabama have some ugly-looking losses? Yeah, they really do. However, when we look at the committee criteria and games between common opponents, one thing stands out. The committee criteria specifically does not include scoring in the games. It really looks and it really boils down to wins and losses. So, let's go back to the 3 SEC schools. South Carolina, Alabama, and Ole Miss share a couple of common opponents. Oklahoma, who both Ole Miss and South Carolina defeated, and LSU, who beat both Ole Miss and South Carolina. Well, Alabama beat that LSU team pretty badly. And there's one more data point that we want to touch. In the final week of the season, LSU took on Oklahoma. So, we have a guide for which of those games we really should think of as the top one of the grouping. Guess what? It's the one that Alabama won. There are still plenty of ways that Alabama could find themselves off of that number 11 line. Clemson could win the ACC championship. Could be a relatively close game, and we could see SMU hold on to a spot above the Tide. However, what we will specifically not see, according to the committee criteria and according to the guidelines that they have released, is any motion between teams that are already ranked and are not currently playing. So, if you think that what's going to happen somehow is that next week you're going to see Ole Miss and South Carolina flip, or Miami fall in between the other two, or somehow jump ahead of Alabama, you can go ahead and forget it. They have already said that these teams that are not playing are locked in place in reference to one another. We're not going to pretend that any playoff system is perfect, but I will take the one that we've got coming over the one that we had the last several years. We give it an opportunity to see on the field what will happen between teams that would have been left out in a 4-team playoff. One last point to that, I am very happy to see that team fatigue is not guiding any of the decisions that the committee seems to be making. It doesn't matter who you are and where you've been before. What matters is this year and how you've played. It's going to be a great weekend for college football, and I'm excited to see how it plays out. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, or share with your friends. And we'll see you next time on the Heavily Biased Top 10.